All right, thank you. Let me see. Okay, thank you very much. We're not going to spend much time on the introduction. Thank you guys for that. If there's any other thing, we'll see how as we go. And welcome everyone. We are looking at our time. I'll also try and look at the chat as much as possible. But of course, Tuka and Charles will indicate if I'm missing someone because we want to go together. This is a class, so it's going to be difficult for us to say, keep your questions until the end of the presentation. So as you raise your hand, you want to say something, preferably text, so I can just read and then we can move together. If it's quite involved, we can always come back to it. We may not have already made responses at the time when the question is asked. All right, now I think I'm going to share my screen. What I'm going to do now is to share with you the video that introduces, it's about an 8-minute video, I think, that just introduces the course, and then we'll just run through our PowerPoint, which is the first part as part of the introduction in your text or textbook. Let me do that now.
Apologetics comes from the Greek word apologia, which means a defense, as in a court of law. Christian apologetics involves making a case for the truth of the Christian faith. I am convinced that for any one of us to be fully conscious intellectually, we should not only be able to detect the worldviews of others, but be aware of our own, why it is ours, and why, in light of so many options, we think it is true. I urge skeptics to wrestle with the unexamined blind faith on which skepticism is based, and to see how hard it is to justify those beliefs to those who do not share them. I also urge believers to wrestle with their personal and culture's objections to their faith. At the end of each process, even if you remain the skeptic or believer you have been, you will hold your own position with both greater clarity and greater humility. There will be an understanding, sympathy, and respect for the other side that did not exist before. Connection is the main purpose of apologetics. For the Christian, this means connection with God and with each other. If connection is the goal, then the means is love. As important as examining our beliefs is, if we fail to love, we will fail in every other regard. 1 Peter 3:15 is the backbone verse of apologetics. But in your hearts revere Christ as Lord. Always be prepared to give an answer to everyone who asks you to give the reason for the hope that you have. But do this with gentleness and respect. This verse encapsulates every important aspect of Christian apologetics. Reverence for Christ as Lord is an essential prerequisite for building connection with others. Being prepared to give an answer means anticipating difficult questions and objections and being willing to engage with opposition. Lastly, this engagement must be gentle and respectful. As United States President Theodore Roosevelt once said, "People don't care how much you know until they know how much you care." Apologetics strengthens the believer by replacing a shallow, blind faith with a robust and confident assurance that translates into every aspect of their lives. This assurance plays a pivotal role in evangelism and the shaping of culture. With so many Christians afraid to share their convictions and a second wind of opposing worldviews taking hold of the culture, it is now more important than ever that the church engage in apologetic ministry. Apologetics is a powerful tool for getting one's foot in the door to conversations about worldview. At the end of Christ's earthly ministry, he commanded his followers to spread his gospel, the Christian worldview, to the ends of the earth. Go and make disciples of all nations, baptizing them in the name of the Father, and of the Son, and of the Holy Spirit, and teaching them to obey everything I have commanded you. Religion is the most categorically divisive topic to possibly engage with. A productive conversation about religion or worldviews requires humility, patience, respect, and a sufficient amount of rhetorical skill from each party involved. If these elements are missing, conversation turns to heated debate, valid arguments turn to insults, and peace becomes impossible. Because of this, many people in today's culture tend to steer clear of any kind of discussion on religion for fear of starting a fight. This has made the single most important topic that could be discussed taboo. This taboo has not only halted discussion on religious ideas, but has altogether undermined how we think about our own worldviews. If discussion and honest inquiry are suppressed, we will either sort through the issues alone or dismiss them altogether. Stating consequences that reach far.
Mfundisi, we have lost the sound. Just check if you have not muted the video by mistake.
Apologetics has experienced a resurgence.
Yeah, it's back on now.
All right, let's see how far we can go. That, is this screen now changed? Do we have this, Shawaz?
Yes, I can see even
So
though
that was just a 7-minute, 8-minute summary, which covers all that we want to say in a nutshell, just to give an idea of what we mean by apologetics. I can remember a question asked somewhere where it says, what are we apologizing for? What have we done? Why must we be apologetic? It's not an English word. It comes from Greek, which means defense. And that's what we want to look at. So the word itself refers to the defense of what you believe to be true. You're defending it. So apologetics can both be defensive and offensive to a great extent. And this is Josh in our book here. He says, an activity of the Christian mind, which attempts to show that the gospel is true in what it affirms, or the Bible for that matter. An apologist is one who is prepared to defend the message against criticism, distortion, and to give evidences. That keyword will keep coming up, evidence of its credibility. In other words, as much as we talk about faith, but we believe that faith is evidence-based. It is not a blind faith. It is not a leap into darkness. Christian apologetics, therefore, is the rational defense. This is Groothuis Douglas, not Groothuis, because he's not Afrikaner. Groothuis. It's apologetics, the rational defense of the Christian worldview as objectively true, rationally compelling, and existentially or subjectively engaging. So it contains both the truthfulness of the proposition and the beauty of its content. It engages you also subjectively. It's not just the mind, it takes in the whole being. So this definition of apologetics invokes both rational legitimacy the above definition: objective truth and emotional appeal, subjective attractiveness. In other words, it's like saying, proving that heaven is a reality as a truth, but having done that, you have not shown that it is attractive. You still have to show that it is an attractive place. So apologetics doesn't just show that God exists, because God can exist and then you're afraid of him. But it shows a God who exists, but also delves into the fact that he's a loving God. It shows that Jesus Christ rose from the dead, not just as a historical fact, but what it means to us existentially, how it prepares us to face life. And so those are the areas of apologetics. So the word apologetics, as we have heard, comes from the word apologia, others say apologia, which can be translated as defense or vindication. In the days of the New Testament, an apologia was a formal courtroom defense of something. As you can see them, Paul saying, in my first defense, he uses the word in my first apologia, in my first defense, when he was arrested in Rome during the time of Nero. It appears all those times, about 8 times, but the most fascinating and comprehensive definition of apologia is the one we find in 1 Peter 3:15. It doesn't just define it, it also looks at the methodology. It also looks at how we should go about the whole enterprise of apologetics. Now, because I'm on a big screen here, I might not. Okay, I'll have to remember to go to chat and make sure that we are good if there are any questions. All right, let me. Oops.
We are monitoring the chat. There is nothing at the moment.
Okay. Now, this word, both in its verbal and non-form, is used specifically for a rational defense of the gospel. You find that in Philippians. You find that also the famous text, of course, for this exercise is 1 Peter 3:15, beautifully explained in our opening text. So, now this is now putting the two together, the objective truth and the subjective existential dimension of truth. And listen to Blaise Pascal. He says, men despise religion. They hate it and are afraid that it may be true. The cure for this, of course, they hate it because, as you will look later on, as you will see later on, it forbids them to do what they would love to do. So they hate it. But then they are afraid that it might actually be true that there is this reality called God, entity called God. And so the cure for this is first to show that religion is not contrary to reason. You are not being called to be anti-intellectual when you believe, but worthy of reverence and respect. Next, we have to make it attractive. In other words, when the Bible talks about not to steal, that may not be attractive, even if you can prove that it is true, but you have to show that not stealing is actually true. So those are also the terrains that apologetics must cover. So we have to make it attractive, make good men wish it were true, and then show that it is. I always think that if you could manage to convince someone that...
Sorry, Dr. Papu, are you aware that you are still screen sharing the video in case you are following PowerPoint?
No, I'm supposed to be following video. PowerPoint now, not video. Okay, let me do this. I'm supposed to be following PowerPoint and not video. Okay. That's why I was checking to see. What's this? Are we together now?
Yeah, we have you now. Men despise religion. That's the slide.
Okay, this is Pascal who says men despise religion. And I've just was explaining. So what we have to do then is to make it attractive, make good men wish it were true, and then show that it is true, worthy of reverence, because it really understands human nature. In other words, apologetics is not just a dry enterprise. It also has got those beautiful, if you please, evangelistic aspects that shows the attractiveness, that shows the beauty, that shows the existential relevance of the proposition. And so we must also balance it with that. Otherwise, you might prove that heaven is a good place and objectively is true, but people may not want to go there because it is not attractive. So I mean, Crotes also adds to that. He says they fear that if it is true that is a religion, they are on the hook, and if they submit to its terms, their lives will get worse. But if it is true and they fail to submit, God will get them in the end. So they are in a dilemma. They're in a serious, genuine dilemma. That this thing that God exists, they think that says the end will come may be true. And if it is true, we are in trouble. But then they fear that if we accept that there will be judgment, then our lives currently, contemporary, I mean, at the moment will be worse. We are going to be ugly. We're not going to be thinking creatures. We're not going to enjoy life. We're going to miss out on life. You see, and then they are in that quandrum, in that tight corner there. And so apologetics is to actually respond to those fears. So why is apologetics important? You'll see there in that book by Josh McDowell, and that it strengthens believers and also helps students hang on to their faith. So it strengthens you so that you, especially, you could ask, maybe we'll get to that point. There was a time where apologetics wasn't really that important because you would raise your evangelistic tent and preach, and people will accept, because there were not very many worldviews that would contradict that. And so there was no need to be so defensive. People just wanted to hear. There was no need to defend. That is why even now people say, just preach the word, forget about addressing questions and stuff. But they say that not being aware. I was not aware that my video is not on, sorry. All right, and then secondly, number 2, sub-point there, apologetics is offered not only in response to doubts and denials of non-Christians. It also fortifies believers in their faith, as we said. And when John, for example, in Matthew 11, doubted that Jesus Christ was the Messiah, you see? So he's been talking about that. He's a believer. It's not like the Pharisees who did not believe for whatever reason. And you will see sometimes not believing is a way of trying to, it's an excuse, is a way of trying to find a defense, whatever, but we'll look into those as we go. So John genuinely doubted, genuinely entertained doubts, and I don't want to get into the background as to why that was the case, but he was a believer. He actually believed that Christ is the Messiah, but there were things that were happening that made him to doubt. Like any other Christian, you start suffering, you lose this, you pray, God does not seem to answer. Then you start having doubts. Not that you don't believe in God, but then you've got questions you cannot answer. People are asking these questions, you cannot answer them. And so John had to ask his disciples to go and find out if Christ was indeed the Messiah that they were looking for, that they were expecting according to prophecy. And very interestingly, Christ had to actually defend that he is, but he did it in a very wise way, because if a person doubts that you are the one who's supposed to come, how do you do it? I mean, how do you argue? There are many ways, but what Christ did was, now you look at what I'm doing. The blind can see, the dead are raised, gospel is preached. I mean, those are the things that they knew that would happen when the Messiah comes. And then he says, now, based on this is the evidence. You make up your mind. He didn't answer that question. And so what they did, they went back to John and said, this is what is happening. This is what we have observed. And John, even though we are not told in the Bible, must have then believed that, no, there's evidence that he is the Messiah. So what Christ did not just say, no, just believe. You don't have to worry. I am who I say I am. He supplied evidence so that now John had to deal with that evidence and make up his mind. And in a way, was able to deal with his doubt, to find answers to his questions. It helps with evangelism. He also saw that evangelism is focused on presenting the gospel. Apologetics is focused on defending and commending it. In other words, in apologetics, we not only have a straight line that says this is where we go, you also look at the objections. Some of these are not just objections to say that, no, that's not what the Bible says. Some of those are saying what you are saying. They're not just saying what you are saying is not in the Bible, because apologetics seeks to use the Bible to respond to your questions. But evangelism. But apologetics seems to go even beyond the Bible, because people may not even believe that Bible. So apologetics seeks to show that, but this philosophically makes sense. It is logical. And the word there is logical. It is logical, it is philosophically sound, it is experientially sound. And then, of course, you can quote verses. So in apologetics, the issue is not just to respond to questions using verses only. You can, but we have to also give reasons why those verses are true themselves. That's the issue with apologetics. It produces intellectual Christians, and some of us may have a problem with that. That no, I'm a Christian, I don't have. You see, there's a tendency in Christianity to actually disparage and look down upon reasoning, as if your faith, reasoning is a threat to your faith. No, it produces intellectual Christians. People who don't take Christianity seriously, it is because they've seen that Christians are just an emotional group of people who have no evidence for their belief. But no, apologetics says, yes, you may disagree with me, but I have reasons, I've got evidence for what I believe. And it leads us to a point where we can really respect each other in that endeavor. All right, yeah, I'm looking at my time. For example, you would have a person like Dawkins, professor at Oxford, if I remember, or used to, and arguing with Lennox, who's also a professor at Oxford. So you can't then say the one who's a Christian is not intellectual, the one who's a scientist is intellectual. So you've got very intellectual atheists, very intellectual theists or Christians. And so it's a matter of now, how do we interact, how do we engage with the evidence at hand? So the apologetics, in fact, cannot substitute bare emotional favor for intellectual acumen and hard study. So they should work hand in hand, those two, intellectual acumen as well as emotional favor. In other words, we're not just emotional, Jesus lives in me, even though I don't have BA, but I'm born again. You know, all those arguments we use, which sometimes are just anti-intellectual. That's not the point in apologetics. So those who do not yet believe in the Bible or believe the Bible typically are not interested in expositions of biblical doctrine. So you're not going to quote the Bible because they don't even believe in the Bible. Of more pertinence to the unbeliever is whether the arguments under considerations are rationally compelling, not whether they come from an inspired Bible, but are they rationally compelling? This is not just mere evangelism, but it boosts and helps to equip those who would like to do evangelism as well. Apologetics, therefore, is linked to theology, it is linked to philosophy, it is also linked to evangelism. Now, one of the key things why apologetics makes so much sense, especially for Christianity. Now, you will understand that, of course, now that's the case. Most of other worldviews don't really get into apologetics. It's just a matter of saying, I used to be sick, now I'm well. That's the argument. So I'm fine. Therefore, what I'm saying to you is true. If you do it, you'll be healed. But there's no cause and effect. There's no rationally compelling arguments to move the person to help him see this. And but what is very, very interesting, which is something that we need to talk more often about, is that Christianity is a factual faith. In other words, it has facts that can be disputed. Christianity is a factual faith. It is not just subjective. No, this is what I feel. It states facts, and then you have to look at those facts. What do you mean when you say it states facts? Christianity is a historical faith. And there are some people who actually pushes back on that. They say, no. Christianity is just a belief that these things happen, but it is not historical. It is a historical faith. Pinnock says the first backing the Christian claim are not special kind of religious fact. They are the cognitive informational facts upon which all historical, legal, and ordinary decisions are made. Luke 1:1-4 makes it clear that I actually tested, I researched what I'm presenting to you, Theophilus. Does it say Theophilus? But what I'm presenting to you is something that I've researched. So in other words, this is history. This is not just me sucking this from my thumb. It is history. Now, history, and as I said elsewhere, when the Bible records history, it doesn't record it because that history is sacred. It becomes sacred because it is in the Bible. But history is history. If you say Nebuchadnezzar, if you say Nero killed Paul, that Paul was under the arrested by Nero, that's history. There's nothing sacred about that. It's history. But when the Bible reports that and puts it in the Bible, because the Bible is a sacred book, so it becomes part of the sacred text. But it doesn't mean that it is there because it is sacred. It is there because it is a historical fact. And sometimes we don't make that very fine distinction. And that's what comes out through. So when the Bible talks about resurrection, it looks at resurrection as an event that was validated, as Luke says in Acts 1, by Jesus himself through many proofs, through many evidence, through many arguments over a 40-day period. And so therefore, resurrection, when it was first heard, it did not come from the Bible. People didn't read the Bible. They had witnesses, they had people who had seen it. Like you would report an event, it was recorded into the Bible as part of the inspired text, but it doesn't mean that it was an inspired text, an inspired event. It was a historical fact and a part of history. And Paul also in 1 Corinthians 15, looking at the resurrection, he brings witnesses. He says, you can ask some of these alive, you can ask them. He appeared to this one, he appeared to that one, just as you would do if you were to show a historicity of an event. And Peter, of course, argues that we have not followed cunningly devised fables. He also wants to argue for the evidence the basis of his faith. So it is not so much the subjective belief, but the objective reality that demands serious attention. But not only that, Christianity is the testable faith. If it is historical, it can be falsified. You can say that's not true. For example, Christianity hangs on the historical fact of resurrection. All you have to do is to prove that there is no resurrection, that it is not historical, it is not a fact. And then Christianity falls flat. So Christianity falls you, unlike I don't want to mention other religions, unlike Islamic, for example, said Muhammad wrote this thing, God revealed it to him and he wrote. But the Bible is history. You can actually go to a place, the name of the place, the name, the period, the year in most of the books. So those who are reading Ezekiel now, you will see the dates as just all over that book. On this date, this happened. The names of people, because it's history. It's not just a myth like your Greek mythology, where there are no historical places, where there are no geographical places, where there are no dates. It's just a myth. The Bible doesn't fall under that. Christianity does not rely on inner experience as its ultimate source and warrant for religious knowledge. That's Hazen. All right. So there are misconceptions about Christianity that now we have to deal with if we want to talk about Christianity. First of all, we're not going to argue this. We'll just throw them. Christianity is a white man's religion. It's a Western religion. So don't bring this thing to us. It's a Western religion. And when people make that decision, usually it's not a reflective one. They have not reflected on that. It's a what we call interpretational reflexes. It is just a reflex. It is just an unthought, sometimes not very well thought statement. People are responding to the fact that in the 18th century or so, missionaries came and they told us about Christ. And for them, it means it is a Western religion. But if you read, you will understand that the West itself received the religion, if you please, Christ, who was a Hebrew from Palestine. And actually, if you still go further in your history, you discover that actually there was Christianity in Africa before you had it in Western Europe. Your oldest Bible is not Wycliffe's Bible written or translated in the 12th century or so, but your 2nd, 3rd century translation of the Coptic Bible. So in other words, you had the Bible in the African language from 1,000 of years before you had it in the Western mind. So, but I'm just throwing those things. So those will be the misconception of Christianity, that we have our own, and those are the things we need to talk about. Bible was written by whites to oppress Africans, but then there are other arguments. Why do we have the Bible also in places where there are no Africans? There is no God. If God was there, he would prevent evil and suffering. Sometimes we call what we call anti-God or misotheism, that you hate God or you are against him and you call yourself an atheist. God could be there even if there's evil, which means God is evil. The fact that there's evil doesn't mean there's no God. It means there's a God who probably has no problem with evil. But those are some of the issues we'll have to look at. Christianity is based on faith and not evidence. Christianity has committed injustices, slavery, colonialism, etc. So it can't be true. But Christianity can also do all those things and still be true. Christianity can commit injustices, but God can still exist. You can argue that in the Old Testament, God is a God who justifies killing of other nations. That's fine. That's a God who does that. It doesn't mean it does not exist. All right. But of course, we can look into those objections. Christians are hypocrites. Therefore, because Christians are hypocrites, therefore, what God does not exist because of Christians. That also, it's a fallacious way of reasoning. All religions are true. Well, if you say all religions are true, is that absolute? You're making an absolute statement to argue for religious relativism, which also creates a problem. And people actually will find that because of the teaching of the Bible on sex, for example, or smoking or drinking or whatever else that people might want to do, and then their only legitimacy is to actually discourage or push back on the legitimacy of the or the truthfulness of the Bible, because I want to enjoy my life. Therefore, it will be better for me not to believe that God exists. If the Bible says you will give an account, so you see, evolution is going to be attractive. If I come from an animal, I'm not going to be judged. So it becomes attractive because it actually gives you reason to live the way you want to live. So what do we mean by being an apologist? We must be gentle and humble, as you saw in 1 Peter 3. If we're not gentle in how we present the truth, this is Willard now. Willard, how we present the good news, how will people encounter the gentle and loving Messiah we want to point to? So be gentle and humble. Be relational. If you are going to be an effective apologist today, you must build a relationship. Don't be like those evangelists of the past where you just don't care about people and you just trash them and you just condemn them. And I've seen apologists who are really rude. You can see them. I wish I could just play one of the videos where you have a rude, calling people by all, hey, stupid, hey, what, you can't even think. That's not what we do in apologetics. Be studious, critically examine your arguments, and understand both sides of the issue. Be a practitioner. In other words, practice what you teach. People want to know not only if we can make a good argument, but also whether our lives reflect the truth we proclaim. That is now how to be a good apologist. Jesus was an apologist. He used logical arguments to refute his critics and establish the truth of his views. Of course, most of his opponents were Jews, so he had to appeal to what they also accepted as true, which was the Old Testament. How readest thou? As part of his arguments. And then he used natural examples, the birds. Look at the birds. They don't do this. And in his arguments, and also he would, and somebody, there's a book where I think it was Grootes who actually shows how Jesus also qualified as a philosopher, how he would respond to questions in a way that would really astound even the intellectual of his day. Jesus showed that Christianity is not an anti-intellectual faith. In other words, as you find those of you on the steps to Christ, the last page, it says how to deal with doubt. In other words, there's room to doubt because you're dealing with facts, but how then do you deal with that? Now, I like what Ellen G. White says as I end, then we'll have 5 minutes of response or questions. The truth of the divine word can be best appreciated by an intellectual Christian. It doesn't mean that if you're not an intellectual Christian, you cannot, but best appreciated. Christ can be best glorified by those who serve him intelligently. Now, that's what Ellen G. White says in that book. And I want to rest my case on that point and then see if we have some questions or comments that we want to make in the last 5 or so minutes. Thank you.
Thank you, Mfundisi. I don't see comments or hands raised. While I keep scouting, perhaps I can just reflect on 1 or 2 things, but also a question for you. I think from your presentation, one of the things that's clear is the respect that apologetics invites us to show for people who are skeptical about our faith. Because quite often we can be very dismissive. I mean, your example about the things that we used to take for granted, that you pitch a tent and then it's full, you preach, people get converted. we can no longer take that for granted. So in other words, our beliefs can no longer be taken for granted, as was the case in the past. But the inverse is also, I think, true from an apologetic point of view, that we should also not take people's objections for granted. We should actually engage with them, interrogate them. I liked how Paul responded at Athens. He could have gone to the Bible, but he started from where they are. He says, I can see from all these, altars that you believe in God, but you say you believe to an unknown God. Now I want to introduce you to this God. So it's an example of how apologetics really treats seriously the questions that people have. I now see that there is a question, which is how does one begin to address seemingly contradictory historical facts? Mfundisi, can you address this one? How does one begin to address seemingly contradictory historical facts?
And that question, by the way, it's not just in the Bible. I mean, you could read any historical textbook, and then you find that there's discrepancy, there's apparent discrepancy or contradiction in those historical facts, and you have to find a way of reconciling them. It doesn't only apply to the Bible. It applies to any historical book, for that matter. It's just that people would use that to argue that the Bible is actually a fabrication. You don't do that. You try and understand from both ends. Sometimes the discrepancy and the contradiction exists in our minds, because when we read these historical books, we sometimes think that the way the history was written 2,000 years ago is the same as it is written today. And so we have to understand, it's part of hermeneutics, part of interpretation, understand how it worked, how it was done. Of course, it also involves actually understanding the text itself. Remember, the Bible was not written in English, so you could say it contradicts when actually the meaning of that word is not what you have in mind. So it is a matter of engaging and accepting that. And at times we may have, especially with the four Gospels, we may have instances where, and you will see when you talk about the resurrection, where this one says there were two people, this one says I saw one person. Does that contradict, or is that a contradiction? Because a contradiction would say there was no one there. There was no resurrection. And the other one said there's resurrection. Then there's contradiction. But if this one says I saw two, maybe when he came, there were two. This one says I saw one. Maybe by the time this one came, the other one had left. So you can't just say because of that, therefore there's contradiction. So at some point, we will have to look at what we mean by contradiction, but be clear and look at the specific illustration or example or text to actually discover that. And you will see those texts will come up and again more often when we talk about resurrection and the records as we find in the New Testament. And I must say, some of the texts we may not be able to reconcile them, but there's enough in our understanding and content to know that not reconciling them does not dispute the fact. We may fail to record or to report an event accurately from 3 people, but it doesn't mean there was no event. If everybody is talking about that event, you are sure that that event took place, but the recording of that event may differ. You can try it. Let everybody report what you saw. You'll be surprised. So it's a matter of looking at those apparent discrepancies and see if we can reconcile or understand them.
Yeah, thank you, Mfundisi. Some of the discrepancies can also be used to actually prove that something is authentic. Because if it's cooked, then the story can be aligned neatly. It becomes a chorus. So we can get to that. I see Ranzu, you had your hand up. Please come in.
Okay, thank you so much. I just wanted to highlight, for me, I found it interesting. So I'm listening to the audio version of the book. When in the introduction section, I believe they're talking about how apologetics is not just the tool you use to evangelize to other people, because when you evangelize, you want people to reform, right, and repent and come to Christianity. But it can also help to ground the one who is a Christian but who isn't sure why.
Yeah.
Why exactly they're Christian. Yeah. So I found
Yeah.
that to be quite insightful. Yeah.
Yeah.
Thanks.
Thank you. Ranzu. That's a beautiful observation there. In other words, it's not just something for the outsiders. It also, for example, we're talking about apologetics. If you look at the list there, almost everybody's a Seventh-day Adventist. In other words, there's no one who says I'm an atheist. So, but why are we doing it? Because it's not just a mere evangelistic tool. It also helps us to be rooted in what we believe, so that we can be able now to do evangelism if we have to, or also engage in apologetics. That's a very powerful observation there.
No, indeed. I can't remember who says that apologetics is pre-evangelism to culture, but it is also post-evangelism to the church.
Mm-hmm.
So
Mm-hmm.
I think that captures what, the point that Ranzu is making. I'm not seeing another comment or hand, but maybe Mfundisi, can you, if someone is to say to you, to what extent should we be open? Because part of apologetics is to have an open mind, to engage in other, so-called contesting truths. Because as Christians, sometimes we are afraid that if you dive too much, you might not come back.
Yeah.
So to what extent should we be open?
There's no extent. We can't say don't go there, stop here. You see, truth that is not examined, truth is not threatened by examination. Unfortunately, because if you say I can't go there, which means you can't say to a person, please don't ask me that question. Where did God come from? So, for example, so no, don't ask that question. But people who are opposed to God will ask that question. So what are you going to say? No, I cannot answer that one. It's a sensitive one. It's too sensitive. No, remember what you're afraid to, where you're afraid to go. The opponents or those who are arguing against your faith, they go there. So you might as well go there. Or yes, it is a risk not to think. It is also a risk not to think. There's a risk every, just have to choose which way you want to go.
Mm-hmm. Thank you. Yeah, I see there's a question from viewer. She says, what is apologetics gone wrong? I think it's an interesting question. I think what she meant is, what is it that can apologetics go wrong? Because as Adventists, we've been accused of being a thinking faith. Can you respond to that? I think she's also talking about over-intellectualism.
Yeah, I think you, in your opening statement, I think you made it very clear, and that statement comes from the Ravi Zachariah's ministry, where they put that as their focus, to make our thinking believers, to make believers thinking and thinkers believers. We need a thinking faith, but we also need a beautiful faith. We also need a committed faith. We need a believing faith. In other words, we're not just producing intellectual Christians, but we're also producing beautiful and attractive Christians. Like we said, a Christian is an intellectual faith. It is an intellectual faith. But there's nothing wrong with intellectual. But I think what you are saying also, when we make it intellectual and we're not practitioners, in other words, it just becomes a conglomeration of facts, but the way we relate to people, it says something, and it defeats the whole purpose. So I think is it in the book Education, where Ellen G. White talks about the duty of true education is to make our students to be thinkers and not reflectors of mere reflectors of other men's thoughts. But it also makes us to be true to our convictions and to stand for the truth. So it's a balance there. I don't know whether, viewer, we managed to capture the essence of your question there.
Thank you very much. Yes, indeed. Thank you for this.
All right.
Okay, thank you so much. We are now at 7:35. We want to stick to our time parameters. So if there is no question or comment, I will ask Mfundisi if you have any parting shot. Then we can conclude. Our next lesson is going to focus on the existence of God. We are going to engage with some of the objections around the existence of God. In other words, those who say God does not exist. What is their basis for thinking so? And then we will look at some of the tools available for us to respond to those questions. Questions which, by the way, are not only coming from people who are completely outside of faith, but even within. So this is going to be quite an important one for us. Mfundisi, any parting shots?
Yeah, listen, I think we would be overstating the purpose of this course if we say we will answer all the questions. But I think what we want to say is it is not unchristian to reason through some of these issues. And to be able to say, I don't know, I don't have the answer, is also part of reasoning. Science, if you please, does not answer all the questions. You'll be surprised to know that even as we speak now, scientists cannot tell us what is energy. I mean, in the level of quantum physics and quantum mechanics, there's so much happening there that even scientists cannot answer everything. But they are observing it, but they cannot give reasons why that is. And you will see, even when we talk about the origin of life, that science gets to a point that says we don't know. So we are not saying that we know everything, but we should know what we don't know. And that's also part of reasoning. And so I think I thought I should just share that with you. We shouldn't be afraid to say, I don't know, let me go study. I don't know. Reality is there, but really to actually think that you will know everything is to fool yourself. No one does. You can't know more. You can't know everything about God. You don't even know everything about yourself.
Yeah. No, thank you, Mfundisi. I think at some point it will be useful to engage in this concept of sufficient proof. I think what we are trying to demonstrate and establish is that there is sufficient proof, and the Christian worldview within the marketplace of worldviews is the most plausible, and we are going to demonstrate why.
And something like inference from the best explanation, in other words, which is the best explanation here? We don't know, but which is the best explanation? You explaining that life comes from non-life, and me saying life comes from life, which is the best explanation? Best inference. So those how we deal with things that have to do with origin, because we were not there, but based on explanation, which one, if I were to use layman's term, which one makes more sense?
So thank you so much, and thank you, class. We are ending here for now. I'm going